This is the High Performers Club podcast with your host, executive life coach and entrepreneur, Jennifer Shell. Join Jen as she explores what drives individuals to excel in their careers, sport, personal development, and the pursuit of passions. Our guests share their experiences, challenges, and triumphs en route to success. So grab your notebook and get ready to join the club of high achievers.
I am very excited to have an exceptional guest. Author Gwen K. Harvey is here with me today. Her second book, The Acquisition of Elizabeth Grace, has just been released. We're going to talk about all things building business. We're going to talk about becoming an author, striving for the next step in life, and everything it's taken to get there. Welcome, Gwen Harvey. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very happy to join you.
As I was looking through your bio and any information about you, High Performers Club, you could not be a better fit.
Thank you.
You've had, a life up to this point, a career of success, and really seem to be chasing personal goals and dreams as well. And I think it's pretty exceptional. And I'm really grateful to share with our listeners your path and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So for those of you who haven't read Gwen's bio, which I imagine until this point you might not have yet, but you will, Gwen's had a really successful career in financial service for the past 30, 40 years.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Before transitioning into writing, fiction specifically.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to make such a change? Writing is such a departure from financial services, and you've had wild success there. What inspired that change?
Well, it's one of those good COVID stories. I think there are some really rough ones out there, but my COVID story was a good one in this area because I was used to being in this financial services practice, and I was also very engaged in the philanthropic front on committees. So I had a very full life with lots of appointments, lots of evening engagements. Weekends were mine, but I had very, very full weeks. And because of that, I never really pursued the writing that had been something from my youth. And when COVID came along, all of a sudden, everything dropped off the calendar, just slid off. And I would have Zoom meetings with clients, which took a lot less time because there was no travel. And I didn't have any of these evening engagements. So instead of watching Netflix, is what I usually say, I sort of returned to something that had always been percolating a little bit. I had written 3 to 5 pages on a rainy afternoon on a Sunday, things like that, where I had just gone off and done little writing. But I went downstairs in 2020. I think it was actually October. It took me a few months to get there, but I went into my study and I just said, I think I'd like to just write something. And I had something on my mind and I started to write this sort of little story of these women coming together after a bike ride and starting to share what was going on in their lives and their minds. They were friends, semi-friends kind of thing. And I, at a time when we were missing our girlfriends, we hadn't, and I just made 3 of them up. And I did this little piece, which actually turned into chapter 4. And then I realized I needed to know who these people were. So I kind of did a little character sketch on each of them. And then I wrote a chapter in first person by each of them that became chapter 1, 2, 3. And then I took them out 5 years and did it again and another 5 years. And they went up together over 3 decades. And that became the girlfriend book. So I never sat down to write a novel. I never thought of myself as a novelist. But that's how it happened. And why it happened is because I had time. I had all this open time.
What did you learn about yourself in that process, leaning into the time, engaging with something that really sparked or energized you as a younger version of yourself?
I learned that I loved storytelling. I know I'm very curious, and I think in my financial services business, the client interaction, the best part for me was the beginning when we would just be talking about what's going on in their lives. I was just so curious. And So I love storytelling when people tell me stories. I love reading stories, but I also love to create them. And I hadn't realized how much I love to create them until I started to. And these characters still live in my head today. They're made up people. And I do find, I mean, I hear this from readers too. They say, when are you going to do a sequel? Well, I took them from age 30 out to age 60. I'm not sure if I'm ready to take them out further, right? Because it sort of was just this piece in time. But they too, my readers have said they really still think about these three women.
I think that's incredible
So,
to build.
yeah.
It's almost like you take a little piece of, maybe it's, you know what, actually that's a better question. Where did the
Hmm.
inspiration from them for these characters, these
Yeah.
girlfriends, come from? I'd love to know how
Yeah.
you built those character sketches.
Well, they did come from meeting some fantastic women over time. And so, in a way, they are slight compositions of people I knew they were people I didn't know well. Nobody is a close friend. It was somebody I sort of knew, and then I modified them because I didn't know them. I didn't know their lives. So I made everything up around them. But I did have sort of pictures of these three women in my head that were slightly modified. And so I guess the inspiration came from great women you meet along the way. And also I had taken a couple of bike rides with women before, and that community of spirit that you have when you get together before, after, during. And this book has been a great gift. I've seen women order a number of them and give them out to their friends. And often they're this group that they do ride with once a year. That's what the story is about, every year coming together and having this ride, and then having a dinner and staying overnight at a B&B. And so you have that. I always think, you when you think about camp, why people make such great friends is when you sleep over, when you're all, going up together late at night and you're waking up in the morning. It's this continuity of conversation that sort of binds you. You know, so if you can't go to camp, go out with your girlfriends to a B&B, and it's kind of like that.
Yes. And honestly, now I'm thinking, okay, what time of year? How many girlfriends? Like now I'm right. I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to reach out. And this is what a beautiful concept, and making it an annual thing. And I also think there's a stage of life, and through the multiple stages, you see these characters through their life in the girlfriend book, where you just need to talk and listen, and the
Yeah.
camaraderie and the connection of shared experience. And I think
Yeah.
it's definitely where I am, and with my friends in life is.
Yeah. And the feedback I've had, people have said that it seems to be that it have captured all these different issues, because I did have 3 decades to work with. So with those conversations, so it touches on, you know, family, children, spouses, life, death, divorce. It touches on our children being who we hope they'd be, being different from who they were in our minds, and then how you pull that together. It has all these different elements in it because there was time to write it, and a time frame of 3 decades that these things could unfold without being pushed. They just gradually happened. I did, for storytelling purposes, put in a murder that happened. So this is one thing where it's that part would be more dramatic than maybe what happens to normal. It's actually, I remember listening to I think a police officer talk about, if you look at all the books that have murders in them, and that's not how many murders out there are. Like, it's a lot fewer than the reading world would make it
Imagine,
look like.
right?
We just need these dramatics, and I always think of him when I added that in. But for me, it actually created a scenario where it allowed all these characters to react to it, so it was a good focal point. But yeah,
Now, as you went through that process, I know your next book is a thriller. As
yes,
you went
yeah.
through that process, did that spark any of the inspiration for this next?
Yeah, interesting, because I had in between the acquisition of Elizabeth Grace, which is more historical fiction. Yes, this next one. What actually happened in both my second and my third book is that when I was writing them, I was involved in some writing courses at University of Toronto. Sorry, I take that back. The second book, The Acquisition of Elizabeth Grace, it was my editor once they had signed me. that told me that this wasn't fiction, this was historical fiction because it was from the 1960s. So I didn't know that. I just thought I was writing fiction, right? And so anything over 50 years is apparently historical fiction. But it is historical fiction that's been written not because of wanting to place it in a certain time and tell another story of that time. It was just, it for me, it fit nicely. It was a beautiful time to write it in. So to your question on the third one, with the third one, again, was in class, and it was my teacher who said, "Do you realize you're writing a thriller?" And I didn't. I thought, oh, I was just writing fiction, and it happens to be about stolen identity, and there's a crime ring, and she said, no, it's thriller. But the problem here, because she'd read a fair bit of it, is you have to kill more people, and so, and I was like, what? And she says, yeah, it's a thriller. People expect murders and things to happen. And I thought, oh, okay. Well, I liked everybody I had. So I had to start making up new characters, inserting them so that I could kill them.
So you could like
right?
them less,
so it was sort
less
of
connection.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I could let them go. So it was. I didn't know it was a thriller, and I would even now sort of say it's a suspense novel, and we'll wait for if I'm fortunate to be picked up by a publisher. Working with them, we'll figure out what they would say the genre is. I tend to just write, develop story, characters, plot, and then it gets labeled for what it is after the fact.
I love that. You don't put it into a box to start. You see the evolution of it and it kind of tells
hmm
you what it is.
Yeah. And because I'm not writing for commercial success, I mean, I definitely would love to see it widely read, and but I'm not trying to fit into a box so everybody will love me and want me, right? That sort of thing, or so I can pitch myself to somebody that I'm something. I was actually told by I think it was Emma Donahue, who I had the chance to meet at Bibliobash, and she talked about how she moves between um, sort of contemporary fiction and historical fiction, and publishers have not liked that, and she's had part of ways with some publishers over the fact that she switches and moves, but she's sticking to her guns. She's writing what she wants to write, and it was very helpful to hear that from her, and she encouraged me to stick with what you want to do and go from there.
What's the benefit of charting your own path?
Mm. I think it makes your story truer. You're not, trying to contrive it in some way, if that's a word, contrive.
I just had a moment
It
where
is
I
a word,
wondered if
but
charting your own path made sense.
yeah, yeah. No, no, it's fine. No, I think of contrive. I don't think of using it as a verb. That's all the way I used it. But I might look that one up before I ever put it in writing. But yeah, yeah, I think it will always. I mean, it happened in my business life too. I would do something the way I thought it might work best, and it might be different what some others might do, but I do it anyways. I think that conviction to follow what you think might work. You can always change if it doesn't, but it does come from maybe many positive experiences reinforcing that, and it does probably come from childhood if somebody believed in you. And I did have a father who had an older sister who I think had a real influence on him, and so he always believed he had three daughters and a son, and I think he always believed we daughters would do just as well as the son. So I sort of lived in that environment. So it was you could trust I could trust what I was thinking I might try. Not to say it all works, but it most of it worked.
The interesting part about going with your gut or trusting that intuition, whether it's creatively or in life, I think they're very similar. As you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, this is a lot, whether it business, in your writing, or just in life decisions.
hmm
I see a lot of clients that I work with who are craving that in their life circumstance. And I think the big ideas, the big moments come from trusting your intuition,
hmm
right? If it doesn't
hmm
work, it's okay. If it does,
Yeah.
it's usually better than you expected. And so it's always just risk reward, right? But I think the confidence to do
Very
that is
and very much, and I think too, when it comes from the inside of you, your commitment to it and the way you run at it is at a different level of energy. And so the opportunity for success is probably higher because of that energy you apply into the commitment you put into
Yeah,
it.
that is bang on. And I think you see things differently when it came from you internally, right? Your perspective on the circumstance is so driven by
Hmm.
your desire or passion or excitement, or it changes the way you see it. So, no, such a parallel there. I think it was just important to highlight. Um,
Hmm.
so now as you reflect, I imagine, and I am not an author, it would be amazing to go down that road. You had such a long career, successful philanthropic
Hmm.
experiences, and like you were
Hmm.
so heavily integrated into that space. I wonder, did you ever consider writing about your life and your experience where it was more along whether it's autobiographical or whether it would be a self-help? Did you ever, because you have so many beautiful life experiences, did you ever consider that, or was it always going to be fiction?
Yeah, I never considered it. I don't normally like to talk about myself. So this is actually an interesting experience, having you say these nice things and, and me having to explain myself. My whole business practice was focused on the clients and their story and what was happening in their lives and how to, create strategy and improve their overall wealth strategy position, all these things. But no, I would not consider writing about myself or things that had to do with business. And in fact, I guess I was interviewed about how it was strange that I was sort of outside the box, somebody with the level of experience that I have and certainly success that I had. Um, why wouldn't I be writing about that? Because that's typically what happens when someone's retiring. They would write about that. And I wouldn't find it interesting, actually. I would find it sort of like recording history, like it would be work.
Yeah.
Whereas with storytelling, creating story is much more fun. You can make things up. And I have to say, I have a girlfriend who's involved in memoir writing, and I've met others that have been involved in memoir writing. And I think that is super tough because you're telling a true story. And so I have great admiration for people that do memoirs. But I love fiction because I can just make it all up.
Yeah. And I guess writing a memoir as well, like there's so many people involved. It's not just your story. There's a lot of, right, other people who have been or crossed the path. And
Yeah.
so what part of their story do you tell? I feel like there's probably a lot of tough decisions to make in memoir writing.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one little experience that happened that was kind of funny was, in the acquisition of Elizabeth Grace, after I'd completed the book, I then proceeded to do a prologue and an epilogue, and this often happens. They come after the book's done. And in that, I wanted this character who was now in her 60s to be looking back at this story in her life. And then you go into the story, which is the novel. And to do that, I thought, well, let's have her going through all these things as she's packing up a house that she's been in for, 30 years or so. And then she tells her daughter the story because the daughter's come to help. And when I was doing that, I was thinking about my own daughter. I have three kids, but I was thinking about my daughter. I have two boys. And I was thinking about my husband as I wrote about it was my husband and my daughter helping to do this pack up. And I put in some other names and it just didn't feel right. So I reached out to both and said, it's okay if I put you in here. And they said yes, and used their names. And the crazy part about it was that it really confused friends of mine who started to read the book because they saw Richard's name, they saw Jacqueline's name, they saw I was packing up a house we'd been in for a very long time. They knew we'd been in that house for a very long time. And even a woman who had helped us with some design work in our home a couple of years before emailed me and said, I didn't realize you'd moved. And I said, no, this is fiction. I'm writing fiction. But as soon as you put this element that people can read that's so close to you, that's slightly memoirish, they think, oh my
This
gosh, is
must
this a
be a
memoir?
reflection of your present lived
Yeah.
experience or your lived experience.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But it was just that I found it very tough when something was so real to me, which was this idea of packing up, which we haven't done. We're still in the same home, but and then I was visualizing her talking to a daughter, and I just thought, well, it'd have to be my daughter as I visualize this, because she's not actually in the book. She's just there. So it was a great experience, but I'm just on the memoir side. Um, Interesting, the feedback from putting truth in and how people respond.
Yeah, I think it would be incredibly challenging, but do you find writing fiction a little bit of an escape?
Oh, totally. Totally escape. Yeah.
Because reading it
Yeah.
is. So writing it, I
Yes.
can't even imagine you just get to be the creator of this world or this space or these stories that are culmination of maybe things you've seen or experienced, but also then you can build on it.
Yeah. It's like watching a movie, but you are creating the movie, but really the characters are, because if you even think in conversation, you and I here today, I don't know how I'm going to respond to your question. And then then I say something, and then that twigs something in you for another question. And so when you take two characters and you have them question and answer, again, you don't know what's going to happen, but it leads your story. So if you have some plot thoughts, but then you have put your characters together and they're responding to something that's happened, then your story just happens, but you don't know where it's going to go, and then it starts. And if it gets a little bit too much by the end of the chapter, you just cut it back, edit down a bit, take the best parts. What I've learned too, I didn't know this in my first book when I wrote with dialogue, I was making it very real dialogue. But I've learned that with dialogue in books, to make it tighter, you do want to take the best of the dialogue. They don't have them talk too long. Don't, get to the point, right? Sooner is how, when you're writing dialogue, it's not completely the way we talk.
Because I was going to say, I struggled to get to the point, and so I
Yes,
can't
there
be
we
in the
go.
book.
I don't know. So I would say the girlfriend book, is not as tight. It has more truthful dialogue, but it's gotten great reviews. It's just that it's definitely the second one. It's different how I've handled it.
And skills you learn along the way. I think you've mentioned several times taking writing courses, and really,
Mhm.
I know you're integrated into the writing world. Are you on Book Talk?
No, no, I'm really new at this, right?
Yeah.
So, because when you look at the pattern, is I began to write in 2020, and then I self-published in 21, and then I was writing the second book, and it got picked up and came out in 2024 this year. So really, and those are two such different experiences: the self-publishing and the publishing. Because one little just analogy is to think about it is that when you're writing, it's such a quiet, solitary act. And when you self publish, it still is a very quiet, solitary act. Now, you could go out and give yourself a book launch, I guess, if you self publish. I didn't do that. I just kind of wrote it, self published it. It's out there. Friends would buy it. I would gift it. And then it sort of went out beyond that to friends of friends and things like that. But it's still a very quiet little world. And then the publishing, though, once you're with a publisher, once they have it, you get into this frenzied activity of editing, which is a very dynamic time as you tighten, get it ready. And then once you launch it, it's like a party. It's such a public event. And then I had 4 launches. In total, we probably had about 20 different kinds of gatherings. And I'm now talking at book clubs, I'm loving talking at book clubs and being a guest at book clubs. And I shouldn't say talking at, I love the feedback and I love the questions and people talking about their experiences too. So it's the discussions, I should say, at book clubs. And they often move into the writing experience. So it's not just about the book. But with all that, it's a very public facing. So it feels so different. It's like a party compared to quiet little cone of silence sort of thing.
I
So
think it's
that's
so
yeah.
cool that you got to, I mean, in such early stages of your career, experience both.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Because I'm very glad that I had that chance to self-publish that first one and go through some highs and lows in doing that. I was with one entity that I worked with for the first 3 years. And I was happy for the first 2 years. And then they started having all sorts of issues and really became a bit of an AI company. You could never get in touch with them, never get anything modified. So I had to move it from there to another self-publishing um, situation. And actually, I wrote about this in my author newsletter for August. And anyone who would like to sort of see about that journey, and I sat there and thought about the different types of self-publishing routes you can go. So I think there are basically three, and laid it out and then talked about the experience. But I was glad to have that because it's sort of an insight into part of the book publishing business. But then, yeah, it was magic to be picked up by a publisher. I had the very unusual scenario of sending my manuscript into one place, and they accepted it. Now, not right away. It was about 6 months later that they got in touch. But it was a girlfriend who was reading along beside me when I was writing this book. And she said, "You've got to send this in." And she found it and she said, and I thought, okay. And she'd been so great about, you know, with my writing and encouraging me. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to have to. So I just sent half of it in, and they called back and said, "Can we have the other half?" And then nothing. And then 6 months later, they called back and were really interested. And it was magic because that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen with one,
No,
right? Yeah,
I have a coaching client who is a poet, and she got picked up and she did the whole launch and tour and book clubs. And it is so, there's a lot that goes into it. There is so much collaboration. I think once the publisher steps in and design, you name it. And I was so fascinated by the process. But when you have a book in your hand, you don't realize how many people have touched it. You don't realize how many manuscripts go out in comparison to get published and picked up. So that was going to be one of my
right.
questions for you is
Yeah,
book number
yeah.
2, one self-published experience. I mean, I think it's quite typical to not listen to me. Like I know the publishing world so well, but I think it's quite typical to not hear for a period of time because they're flooded and inundated.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you celebrate the magic?
Oh, yeah. I think there was champagne
I
involved.
love that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to say, if I think about the most excitement I've felt to do with the writing and being involved in authoring would be when we signed that it actually happened. And I think as in most things, the most excitement was at the very beginning when they said that they were interested. Now, then you have this anxious period because I keep running the people that I feel for them. They had that call, they went down a path, and after a few months, suddenly they're ghosted and nothing happens. And there's a lot of ghosting that goes on. It's really interesting in the publishing and book world. They don't necessarily write back and say no thank you. Sometimes they don't write back at all, which is fine if you haven't started a conversation. But you think if you started a conversation, you might finish it because someone starts thinking, my email didn't get through. So I've talked to some women who this has happened to, and I feel for them. But it's been a good experience learning it because I realize it's not like my business world that I was in before. Very polite, follow through is very high. That's what you do in business. You tie things up always, whether it's a yes or a no, right? But the book business is a little different. So I may have rambled there. I'm not quite sure what the question was.
No, I love
But
the rambling is highly
okay.
encouraged. Yes.
Okay. All
And it
right.
wasn't rambling.
All
You're
right.
just giving us the background and you answered the question. Um, yeah, I think it's just an interesting when we allow people space to talk, and I think this is you
Mhm.
get so much authenticity and truth in the situation as they're almost sorting it out. It's in real time. And that's my whole coaching space. And then staying
Yeah.
curious with those moments because that's what
Hmm.
generates the questions. I'm
Yeah.
genuinely have
And
so many.
yes, yeah. And the premise of the girlfriend book was along this line about how a lot of our answers come from ourselves, but they need to be articulated. So when you're in a little headspace and you have a problem and you're thinking and trying to find the answer, it takes a lot longer, I find, than when you talk it out with somebody. And it's not like they find the answer. Sometimes they ask the question that's helpful. Sometimes you're just listening. And as you talk, run into it. And I saw that in my practice, my business practice a lot. Clients would find their own answers. They just need the space to be in. to discuss it. And girlfriends do that in a very big way.
And that is the entire kind of life coaching at its core. I am
Yeah.
never giving anybody advice. I am never telling them what I would do because it's irrelevant. It is all about creating that space to go on a tangent, to get the
Mm-hmm.
words out of your head so they're not perfectly articulated. And then I just stay curious and ask the questions as they come up, which is why I also enjoy this process. I had this list of questions and now I'm like, no, I have so many more.
And what I should say, because your listeners can't see you, but I can see you because we're on a Zoom
Yes.
together or some form of that, is that you have a very expressive face. So as you ask the questions, that curious part of you comes through in a big way. So it makes the person on the other end want to answer very willingly. And then, there you are, you're nodding along, you're with me. So you have some fabulous communication skills. I can imagine you being an excellent
Oh,
coach.
thank you so much. That's so kind. Yes, no, I'm expressive to say the least. And I have passed that along wholeheartedly to my 6-year-old daughter, which I'm finding out as time goes on.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Watch out.
Yes. And I think it's also just on that point moving forward, this is such a nice addition to add the video as you go because you see such a different form of the connection. So it will be the
Hmm.
direction. So when Gwen K. Harvey comes on talking about the next book, the thriller,
Yes. Okay.
then we'll have video by then and we'll be able to.
Okay. Sounds
Yes.
good.
Yes. Um, in this stage of your life, again, you've accomplished so much in business now as an author. Is there something that's next, or are you staying very present with this experience?
Hmm. That's a great question. Um, I would say I am staying present with this experience of the writing, this novel, staying focused on it. And then looking after the two I've written. They're like children almost. You want to make sure they're lifted up and they there's a chance for them to meet other people. Um, I guess the other piece in my mind is that the business succession piece of my Bridgewater business, that one I'm in a transition stage with a successor, and we'll see that transition by the end of the year. So there's more time then to move into this writing world. So I guess what I see ahead is making sure that that goes very smoothly. I have a fantastic successor who will be wonderful with clients and has been meeting them and has been working with them already. So that's all good. But to know that that's all good, then I will feel very comfortable about spending more time in the writing. Um, yeah. So does that answer that
Absolutely, it
okay?
does.
Okay.
It does. For some reason, I was just thinking, as you're able to step out of that stage and huge, impactful stage in your life into writing full time and enjoying some time and space for yourself in the life that you've built. I just imagined you on a beach writing. Is that something where are we going to write in our, as you depart from the financial services business?
Yeah. Well, that's yeah. So currently, right now, I write in Toronto and I write up in Mulmer, Ontario, which is 15 minutes south of Creemore. We have a place there, and that's where I am right now. And it's a beautiful office. I look outside at um, grass and trees, and it's a great place to write. Um, one, I it is a portable um, occupation, I guess. So in the future, I could see that I would write in different places. But I haven't sort of scheduled that in because I've enjoyed writing here. We've also just have some limitations on travel right now because something that you would know that I would not normally put in a biography, but it is something I wanted to mention is that my husband had a kidney transplant and I was his donor in January. And I'm mentioning it because it was a fantastic experience. They do say this, the person who donates, usually it it is just such a life rewarding experience because you're able to help somebody, and and you only need one kidney. I mean, it took about 3 to 4 months for me to get my energy back, and I'm past that now, and I didn't need that second kidney, and boy, did he need it. So this was a hereditary kidney disease in his family. He had two brothers who have had transplants as well. One of them, also their wife, donated their kidney. So I mention it just maybe for awareness of organ transplant, that that is one that as a living kidney donor, it was the most amazing experience. I feel my kids love me even more, that I helped their dad. So it's sort of tougher right now to be going away somewhere to do some of the things. I have certainly traveled a little bit this year, but without him.
Yeah.
So I guess sort of the idea of going away for a month or two somewhere, I have to wait a little bit till he can travel, because they just want to keep him in the Canadian health system
Absolutely.
for at least a full year. Um, but The reason to mention it, though, is for anyone who's listening, if you, and I had this happen, I was approached at a party about it, saying that somebody who had a friend and she was in trouble and she really needed a kidney. And what could this woman do? Because this woman was close herself to childbearing years, so that she'd been advised it wasn't a good thing for her to do, which is fine. But there are a lot of their guy friends who are not going to bear children, and you can live with one kidney. So I would say for friends, if you hear there's somebody that has this issue, think about it as a big friend group,
Mhm.
because there's probably a match in there, and it's a very rewarding experience.
I'm not sure what the chances are, but is it not pretty incredible that you would have been the match?
It is pretty, yeah, it's pretty, very lucky. Yeah, yeah, it is lucky, but the anti-rejection drugs are such that you don't have to be a perfect match, but you have to be a match
Yeah.
enough. And yeah. So, and just back to, I've had people say, "Oh, you're going to write about that, I'm sure." It's like,
No,
no,
we'll keep that one
no, that's
close.
not what I'm going to be
Yeah.
writing. Yeah, it's just, but I mention it because I've been asked about it, and I keep thinking, yeah, I would like to speak out, because if it can create the opportunity for somebody who needs it, it's just, I watched my husband's health change dramatically, and just they're just back. It's
And
amazing.
I can't imagine how much closer that would draw you, um, in an
Yeah,
unexpected situation,
yeah,
but you both, you went through it together in the
yeah,
truest
yeah,
possible way.
yeah,
What
yeah.
an incredible story.
It's great. It is a good story. But uh, so just again, I've mentioned it, hopefully for people to think about the people around them when they hear it happen. You could be a catalyst to just creating a group of people to try to find somebody. It because it's really tough. The list is long.
Mhm.
The list is long if you don't.
Yeah. If you
It's
don't
really
find
tough.
somebody within your circle.
Yeah, if you don't come with it, you have to wait, and you go on dialysis, and that's not as good for your long-term health. So you really, yeah. Anyways,
Oh my gosh,
there we go.
what
This turning this into a medical
it
show.
really is. And I know nothing about anything anything medical, but I do know that the look on your face, the way your energy just shifted as you spoke about such an impactful experience within your
Yeah,
family just seemed like a very beautiful thing.
thank you. And I'm just thinking one way to tie it into the writing, because it's the timing of it that was interesting. That um, we found out on January 5th that it was a go. We were going to have the transplant, and that was the time when we were doing the final proofing for my second book, and we're back and forth. So I credit the book for being the best distraction ever. I had a couple of weeks there before going in where I had so many things I was doing to make sure that was off, and to the printers, that it was great. I didn't have to sit there and think about, I wonder what it's going to be like being at the hospital. I wonder what it's going to be like trying to visualize surgery. Like, it didn't
You
have
had deadlines to meet.
exactly. So it was great.
Oh,
So I'm very appreciative to the acquisition of Elizabeth Grace. She got me through it.
that's amazing. Um, well, and I think the timing too that you weren't working on the thriller at that time and trying to off people is
True
probably
point.
helpful.
Yes, yes, it's true. Didn't want to think about things going badly.
Oh
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
just switching gears just a little bit. When you started your
Sure.
career, I know you were in a very male dominant
Yes.
industry. and
Yes.
not sure how it's evolved or, I'm sure it's less dominant, but still fairly. I work in
Yeah.
sport and the evolution of that has been interesting. I work on a primarily female team, which is really unique.
Yes.
I know that you really planted your feet in that space and, it sounds like didn't back down for much in that male dominated industry. What would you say about your
Yeah.
experience and how it evolved?
Yeah. I love this question. Um, yeah. So this is early 1980s. And in my industry, if I was at a conference, as an example, and there were 500 people at the conference, and then it would break to go to the washroom, there'd be 3 women in the washroom, and the men all had the lineups. Right? It was the reverse of what happens when you go out to the theater. And this happened. I think that carried on for a good decade or two. Now, I'd come out of commerce at University of Toronto, which at that point was only 20% women. So I was sort of used to being around men in school environment, and then now men in a work environment. Um, my brother and I were quite tight. I have 2 sisters as well who we are also close. But with my brother, we had similar friend groups as well. So I was used to his friends around. So I was really comfortable with men. And then, as I mentioned, my dad believed, you can do anything just like a guy. So I kind of felt that. I'm sure my mom believed that too. She just wasn't as verbal about it. So, having said that, when I came into the industry, and I could definitely tell that those that were 10 or 20 years older, those men, that I could feel little chauvinism thing. And the way I interpreted it was like, great, I get it. That's how they were brought up. So I don't take it against them. But I'll just go do my thing. Men in my age group were just fine. They were great and very inclusive and like a band of brothers. And I used to just feel super safe with them. If I was traveling on business with them, or, and then meeting up, it just was very supportive. And then I started to do very well quite quickly. And what that meant was I was being asked to speak in my industry. So I started getting known as this, strong producer. And I'm a woman, so that's sort of odd. And I would be asked to speak. And of course, the one that always came up is someone would say, "Well, I would assume most of your clients are women." And well, actually, 95% are men. It's because they were often some of the financial decision makers, or they were just through the connections that I had made. And gradually over time, I built up more women in my practice because they were the decision makers. But it was mainly men always. And so it was a great experience. And I think I credit the support I had in believing that I could do things. And then the support around me from the men that were more in my age range. They were just super supportive. Um, but it worked really well. But, you just put your head down and do
Yeah.
it. Just,
And you know
yeah.
what I found too? There's a lot of superpowers that women have that are such an asset in those spaces. Compassion, right? Patience.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
they, especially in a client service role of any kind,
Trust.
trust,
Yeah.
right?
Trust.
You really build
Yeah.
relationships. And I think in business, that makes or breaks
It
experience.
and it could very well have been a comparative advantage that I was a woman in a male-dominated field, because when I came in, I wasn't what the client was expecting, and then, I would always be sort of said, "This isn't what I expected, and this is great, and you're different from the rest," and all that sort of thing.
That's amazing. And
Mhm.
that really helped you throughout the years, obviously quick to success, but then leaning on those superpowers and not being what anybody expected. What did you
Mhm.
take away from that as you reflect back on your career and the journey? Um,
Mhm.
what are some of the biggest pieces that stand out to you?
Yeah. From my work life, I think um, building Bridgewater, so it went through a different sort of initially, my business was more attached to one company, and then I was able to create my own company and my own identity. So I think successfully launching Bridgewater and growing it, and then some of the very interesting clients, significant families that are, I learned so much from and developed over time. It was just this what I I just sort of you could feel it was like an organism on its own, this company, these great people that were clients, and how it grew. So that was a highlight. I'm not sure if I'm
You are.
answering the
Oh my gosh,
question. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So in business, I would think it was just that, and it was client. And I was thinking too about, you know, success and how you measure it. Because for me, in my business world, I measured it by what the clients were saying and how happy they were, and did we solve issues and make a real difference in what we were up to do. And that was how I measured success. It wasn't, I did do very, very well financially, but that wasn't the measurement. And I'm finding, similar with the writing, it's what the readers say and how they're enjoying it. When I have someone I've never met before tap me on the shoulder and say, I read your book and I really loved it, and this is why, that's success. It's not the numbers of books sold. I mean, I do want to see numbers for the publisher
Of
so that
course.
they feel good about it too. But it's more, that's how I measure success, is am I receiving that kind of feedback, and knowing that we all read books that other people love but we didn't like. So I know that happens. So um, I'm aware that not everyone's going to like my book. Like, they're going to maybe have a certain perception of what it should be, and then it's not what they wanted it to be, or um, it might be just not the genre they enjoy. So you never know. But overwhelmingly, it seems to be that it's been liked more than not.
I think it's interesting talking about measurement, because if you choose feedback and impact as the unit you measure your success by,
Mm,
it's so much less volatile in that, you know, a lot of
mm,
people do, it's numbers based only. And that's okay. There's obviously going to be, KPIs
hmm
along the way, and measure things in that way. But I love it being about impact. And I think that
hmm
it
hmm
also creates a different type of drive in you,
hmm
right?
Yeah.
Um, when you talk about the book and its success and the thick skin you have to have when you put something out publicly.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
good job.
It's okay. Don't worry about that.
What do you think that your business experience has lent itself to having the thick skin about putting your pieces into the
Yeah.
world?
It, it, I think it must have. I think the perspective of totally agreeing that everyone has their own opinion, and it's fine for them to express it. So I, I I feel it's an egalitarian world, and that's okay. Respectfully, though, certainly, in the news, um, we would love our leaders to be a bit more respectful in their views as they express them. But
And social media.
um,
We've
yes, yeah,
abandoned
very
all
much so.
respect when it comes to
Yeah,
social media.
yeah, it's interesting. So I think in business, different points of view, accepting that, and so accepting and having a thick skin in as reviews come in. Um, but it's interesting because I had a review that came in, and I narrowed right in on one sentence where I thought, okay, this person didn't like it because of that. And I was kind of a little, and I was with a friend of mine who actually was an author as well. And I said, oh, I got a review and it's not very good. And she said, send it to me. And then she was like, what are you talking about? 90% of it, they're saying all this good stuff. And you focused on that one thing that was just their view of the book. And it actually is very different from um, all the other reviews. So one of the things that they had said was they they could see the ending. They knew what was going to happen, and yet overwhelmingly, when you read my reviews, people would talk about the twist, and they didn't see things coming. So maybe this one person kind of guessed at something, and it happened, and it was right. It could have been it wasn't right, but for her, she got it right. So it's just trying to understand that people think in different ways. And Stephen King, actually, he has this great book on writing, and he talks about he'll have about 5 or 6 people as his readers when he's finished and ready to put it out there. And he says that if one reader comes back with something, he doesn't pay any attention unless it's his wife. His wife is one of the readers. He pays total attention to her. But the others, he doesn't pay attention to it. But if there's 2 or 3 of them all going the same way, then he listens to it because he says the way readers are, it's just so individual. So, yeah, so the thick skin, I mean, we all try to have that thick skin, but of course it gets through.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, how could, because you want to please, you want everybody to be happy kind of thing. But but constructive criticism is fine. It's
It's
fine.
interesting because with clients that I have, that is one of the number one, the number one thing that people think that they need to overcome, I would say, is that not worrying what anybody else thinks or worrying
Mm-hmm.
less. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's something that, understanding what feedback you're looking for and getting the clarity around, is it perfection you're striving for, because it's not going to happen, and understanding, how to kind of bridge the gap as your expectation or feeling like enough versus the feedback. And
Yeah.
enough is not a unit of measurement, is what I say to
Yeah.
everybody all the time. You need clarity around what your expectations are.
Very good point. I just thinking, yesterday I saw this little Instagram of Taylor Swift, and she was, I think, riding on a bus, and she was showing a picture that she had been looking at of herself. And she was saying to the camera, I'm doing that again. I'm looking at that and I'm thinking bad thoughts, and I'm not going to do that because I know that's not good for me. And I think she says something about being fat. Of course, it was a beautiful picture, but it's how people look at it. And I gather in her past, she's had some times where she's sort of seen herself one way, and she's had to learn to realize she's totally great and fine and beautiful the way she is. And what my thought was when I saw this Instagram was, she's such a fantastic influencer out there. And it was a very positive message to young women to just not look for the little roll of fat. You're great. That's not who you are. And so similar, where I would tie this back, is that when someone points out something, it's a little piece. It's not really who you are. It's sort of the bigger picture to go with that. You know who you are. You know what you're about.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to zoom out almost to that 10,000-foot view and look at yourself as a whole, instead of any of the tiny pieces that we focus in on that might be a very small percentage of what makes up the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exactly right. And I think
Yeah.
it's just human nature, right? She's the most successful, arguably the most successful person on the planet right now, and still has insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody's working to
Mm-hmm.
develop a thicker skin.
Can I just let people know a little bit about what the acquisition of Elizabeth Grace is
Oh,
about?
yes,
It will appeal to some of others.
absolutely.
Takes place back in the 1960s through to the 70s. And it's about a woman who's the baroness, is a daughter of a baron and a baroness in England, beautiful estate, Harrington Hall. And then she comes to Canada and she's married and has kids. So the story starts, and it's told from the perspective of one of her children, um, in this beautiful world that they live in. But it gets turned upside down when this mother, Elizabeth Grace, pretty much disappears from their lives. And when Sophie, who's the daughter, has a chance to go back to England and sort of learn more about what happened to her mother, what happened to the family, what are the other ghosts that are in this family, like what's the stories, and the saga, and then goes on that venture to figure out what happened. So it's the time period is sort of glamorous in the 60s, and it has that flavor to it. But it also has a lot about sort of fraught mother-daughter relationships and loss of love, loss of family, loss of wealth. There's this other piece in it. And then wrestling with ghosts of the past kind of thing. So that's just to sort of a bit of a primer what it's about. Very different from the first one, which is this power of friendship and these women over time together.
I really love how the difference there, and using your imagination and building two completely different pieces, still
Mm-hmm.
rooted
Thank you.
in the things that you find important and the direction. And it's very, very cool to me that you have really chosen again to just walk your own path and not conform to what someone else suggested, needed to be.
Yeah.
So amazing. And the acquisition of Elizabeth
Thanks.
Grace, I know you spent some time in England in your younger years.
Mm-hmm.
Was there
Yeah,
influence from that?
very much, very much so. I was age 9 to 14, so
Wow.
it's not a coincidence that Sophie is age 10. Well, I take her up to 18, but a lot of the story is 10 and at 16, because those are formative years. And so just the Surrey, England countryside, London, the vibrancy of it, it very much was influenced by that. Yeah.
I imagine it's a very unique way to relive some of your life experiences, whether it's just
Yeah.
visually or the way something made you feel.
Yes.
A
Yeah.
unique tool for that.
And so there's a hotel that Sophie and Elizabeth and her family are in England in the story. And, this doesn't wreck the story, but she ends up um, working with the staff behind the scenes because her family, when they arrived in England, they all had this flu bug that she'd had before she'd left, but it was clear. So she's perfectly well, but her family are all down with the flu. And that actually is a true story because when I moved to England at 9, I'd had a flu. I arrived, whole family got the flu, and I kind of wandered out and joined the mates for a couple of days. And so it's true. So I get to take that story, just as you say, and put it into a capsule and keep it now because I've flushed it out. Now, in my story, I have her going downstairs and asking the front desk about it. I didn't do that in real life, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I just think there's so many memories or experiences we have in our life, positive, made, impactful, hilarious, whatever it is, that we don't
yeah,
revisit in a way. The
yeah,
ones that stand out typically are the ones that you, again, relive, that you articulate, that you are constantly, brought up, whether it be in your family or friend group or just yourself. And I think this is such a
yeah.
unique tool to go back and be able to, you know, actively remember.
Hmm.
Really,
Very true.
really, yeah, just it's incredible. And I think the more that you revisit those things, do you find that more memories or more feelings come along with, intentionally
Yeah, I do.
remembering?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And I encourage people that have these great stories that maybe they even tell verbally, to somehow get them down because they're great if they choose to use them later or their family will like them.
Okay.
Okay.
So Gwen, I ask every episode, I ask some rapid fire quick questions. They don't have to be one word. Whatever comes to mind, and they're meant to not be rehearsed. So please don't panic that I
Okay.
didn't send these in advance. Which habit do you
Okay.
religiously commit to and couldn't live without?
Hmm. Time
Oh my
blocking.
God. Yes, to everyone. Yes. You know what? I did a webinar. Now I'm not being quick. So I did a webinar on time blocking and the importance of it. It is so, so
Yeah.
helpful, but maybe part two to that we do together because it is so impactful for people to be able to take a
Hmm.
look and have one clear snapshot of where their time is going in a day. And outside
Absolutely.
of summer, I'm getting back to
Agree.
that. Can you describe
Hmm.
yourself in one word?
Happy.
Oh my gosh, not many people would say that. I love that. And you
Mm,
radiate that, if I'm being honest. You're just a joy. Your
thank you.
energy is a joy to be around. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. What's the primary factor contributing to your success?
Mm. I only allowed one
No,
word.
no, you can use, no, just your first, it doesn't have to be
Okay.
one word.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say it's the mixing of creativity and strategy and discipline, right?
Discipline's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's great to have the imagination and to build and think of these things, but then how to then put them into place. That's where strategy comes in, how you consume the time to do what you want to do. Time is limited, so what's the best use? What's the best strategy? And then the discipline of actually then doing it. You can have lots of great action ideas, but how do you put them into action?
Yes, that is another thing I've been really working with clients on is taking ideas to action. What are your next three
Yeah.
steps? And
Yeah.
then once they're done, what are your next three steps? Right? It is
Yes.
so
Yeah.
important to be able to escape the narrative that nothing ends up being actioned.
Yeah. And sometimes sitting back and saying, what's the one thing I could do that could make a really big difference is a great way to go through all the clutter because you have so much going on and lots on your to-do list, but it'll be like, what's the one thing I could do? And then do it
Yes,
first. Like you're going to still do the other things, but what's going to have the most impact towards what I'm trying to achieve, depending on, what it is, what's at that point, is it family oriented? Is it
I
work
love
oriented?
that. What will move
Other,
the needle right now? Oh,
yeah. And just, I think our brains can sometimes work better when we think of one and with the permission to have more, but that's not going to be the one at that moment.
I love this. That is such good advice, supportive advice for people who are trying to navigate steps to take to accomplish anything. And the discipline part is a big one because I think that people also rely really heavily on motivation. And I think it's fleeting. I don't think even the
Mm-hmm.
most successful human beings wake up motivated every day. I think it's about discipline
Mm-hmm.
that you're still committed to it even when you don't. And I think that's the difference. And I think that discipline creates the motivation. When you see
Mm-hmm.
the result
Mm-hmm.
of the action steps you take or the needle moving one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you follow a specific motto or self-affirmation?
Mm. Uh, the first one that comes to mind is if you think you can or if you think you can't, either way, you're right.
Yeah.
Um, I would have had that one for decades. Um, that's the flavor of the moment
Yeah,
that comes
no,
to
I
mind.
like
There's
that.
probably been other
And
ones. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
incredibly true. It forms your perspective and then further your action from there. So, yeah,
Hmm.
it's so important. What's a piece of advice that has strongly influenced you?
Hmm. When I was early in my business, I think I was in my sort of late 20s. I happened to be working in an office where there was a fellow who seemed ancient to me, which means he probably was my age now. He was probably 60 and I was in my late 20s. And he was aware that I had a very significant piece of business that I was working on. And yet he said, you're running around doing everything for everybody. Um, why aren't you in there sitting down thinking about that one particular scenario, which is really important and could be significant? He would have meant
Mhm.
financially, which is true. It would have been, but it was a large case. It was with a interesting family, and I just went, "Oh, okay." I sort of missed that in the memo to self that when you're working on something that's bigger, it needs maybe a little more focus, bigger time. I was treating it the same as I was the next little case. Just, oh yeah, I'll do it, do it, do it. So I think this I would say that when something is bigger, identify it as bigger and give it a bigger block of time.
Yeah. And that pertains to all aspects of life, right?
Absolutely.
And
Everything.
sometimes we just
Yeah.
fly and don't dedicate appropriate amounts of energy to certain things. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
What is your favorite chip flavor?
Uh, s-
Oh,
salt and
like Miss
vinegar.
Vicky's? Are we going Miss Vicky's? Yes.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. Love it.
I'm with
Yeah.
you. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely, you and I are the same there. When did you realize you were destined for big things?
Oh, gosh. Hmm. I think almost, when someone said it to me, there was a mentor I had who probably when I was in my mid 30s said, I know you can't see it, but I can. And you're going to be very, very successful in this business. And it was, I just sort of looked through his eyes and then he went on to explain why. He was one of those very enlightened, thoughtful males. And and I, I think I got this glimmer from
Yeah.
him of that, oh, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe, right? So, which speaks to the power of people around you, giving them positive reinforcements when you can see things in them that they don't see.
Lifting people up.
Really lay it on. Lay it on because maybe they just need you to crack open a little
Yeah.
crack and so they can see it
Yeah.
too.
And I love calling that a glimmer, right?
Hmm.
Lifting people up and
Yeah.
showing them the best things about them, regardless of,
Yeah.
where they're at right now, I think is so incredibly important. I love that. Um,
Mm.
and having somebody, a mentor especially, see that in you, right? Creates belief like, well, if
Hmm.
he sees that, it must be true. And
Yeah.
then you start looking for those things in yourself. Amazing.
Hmm.
What's something interesting about you that not many people know? This is our final question.
Well, it would have been the kidney donor. That would have been probably the
Yes,
answer,
because I don't know how much more
if I
interesting
hadn't
you can get
except
in that scenario.
yeah. And it's not on your CV, and it's certainly our friend group knows about it, but and it's sort of worked its way out a little bit from there. But yes, I
Yeah,
think I'd say that one.
yes, I agree. And yes, that's a beautiful story. And, I just feel so happy for the two of you to have experienced that together.
Thanks. Yeah,
Well, Gwen
thanks.
Harvey, this has been amazing. I could talk to you for hours.
I've
I
enjoyed
have
speaking with you. You're a lot of
I
fun to
have so
talk
many
to.
other questions.
You
So we're
radiate.
going to have to do this
Yeah,
again. Where can we
sure.
direct the listeners to find you to follow along on your writing journey?
One is Instagram. Please do come follow me. I think of my followers all the time when I'm posting. It's for you. And the Instagram is at Gwen K Harvey. So K is my maiden name is Keenan. So that's in the middle of Gwen Harvey. So Gwen K Harvey. So it's a hat off to my dad and family. And then the other way would be I do have a website, which is gwenkharvey.com. And it has a little bit about each of the books and about me. There's a little history of me. And then there is a news section we're working on that will have more in it. And I have an author's newsletter, which you can sign up either through that website or you can email me. And my email for as an author is gwen@gwenkharvey.com. Everything's sounding a lot the same. And you can just email me and say I'd like to be signed up, and I can, without authorization, sign you up if you like. If you go through the author's newsletter on through the web page, what happens is there's two emails that come to you for verification. They go to your junk mail, so you got to watch for it. But that author's newsletter comes out once a month, and I look for a topic that I think would be interesting. Self-publishing is the topic for August, and I've just sent that out. But if anybody's getting this afterwards, it's fine to let me know, and I can send you a copy. And then I have little updates about what's been going on and coming up, and lots of pictures. And I'm getting good feedback on it. It's that it's informative, each topic.
I would
So
love to read.
happy to
Yes,
have you join.
I did. I've joined. I'm in.
Okay, can I join? Okay, and I can join you onto my newsletter. I'll send you August because it's
Yes, I
just
would
gone
love
out.
to hear more
If you
about the
like, yeah.
self-publishing process and, any insights
Hmm.
or details about your journey. It did not go to my junk mail, so that's wonderful. I
Oh,
just
you
did.
just did it. Oh, great,
Yes,
excellent. All right,
I'm
welcome,
excited. And following along and
welcome.
all of the cool experiences as you promote the acquisition of Elizabeth Grace is exciting to follow. And especially now that we've gotten to know you more, you are an absolute light and a joy. And I am excited also to give away, a few copies of the book together.
Yes.
We'll do that on Instagram. So
Yep.
if you follow
Yep.
us both at Gwen K. Harvey, at Jennifer Shell Coach, and together, we're going to give away a few copies. And I know there's some girlfriends out there who are very excited for the girlfriend book. And I know I'm really excited for the acquisition of Elizabeth Grace and the thriller that is to follow. So thank you so much for your
Hmm.
time. I am greatly appreciative of, all that you've offered us today.
Thank you. I've very much enjoyed our time.
Until next time.
Until next time.